A major setback for Russia and their war in Ukraine. The flagship of their Black Sea fleet has sunk.
The Ukrainian armed forces have so far tried every means to gain the upper hand in the war against Russia. The Ukrainian wing, which has much stronger opponents in terms of land, naval and air forces, has turned to unmanned aerial vehicles to close this gap. Types such as UJ-22, TB2, Phoenix Ghost, Mavic, Phantom III are in the inventory of the Ukrainian army and are in constant use. In addition, the most well-known maritime drones such as Sea Baby are also among the types owned by the Ukrainian armed forces. However, Ukraine must have deemed all these UAV stocks insufficient as it continues to work on this issue at full speed. Most recently, it was revealed that Kiev has broken new ground and designed a brand new drone. So what did this drone look like? Is it used at sea or in the air? Which Russian military targets could be hit by this drone developed by Ukraine? For answers to all these questions and much more, let's get started without wasting any time. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our content. Ukrainian engineers have created a new generation of maritime drones called Katran. This UAV has significantly more capabilities than its predecessors. Katran destroys targets at sea, on land and in the air. The drone quietly covers a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers, attacking locked targets and conducting reconnaissance missions. Katran is a development of the Ukrainian military armoured company Hubei. Information on missions with this UAV is currently classified, but it could become a real game changer at sea. Among the details that are currently emerging about Katran is what weapons will be installed on this UAV. The drone is equipped with torpedoes, a minigun, a machine gun, a portable air defence system, manpads, and other weapons. The Ukrainian armed forces assure that the Katran does not need a separate electronic warfare system. It also has a built-in system for automatic threat recognition and release of false threats. With Katran, which has all these incredible features, Ukrainians can destroy Russian military facilities, command centres, weapons depots. Katran can also target Russia's military air bases, ports with Navy ships. Most critically, Katran can even shatter Russian air defence systems. But can Russia's S-400 or S-500 defence systems intercept Katran? The smallest missiles of the S-400 system and the S-500, an ABM-oriented upgrade, are still 700 to 900 pound missiles. They are radar guided, which may not be the best for trying to shoot down small drones. The system that Russia has and will most likely use is a form of the Pantsir. But Pantsir is not the definitive solution for drones either. Cost must also be taken into account, especially when it comes to Russia. A Pantsir munition to shoot down each drone could shake the Kremlin. This increases the success rate of Katran. Still, even though the cost of ammunition for a jammer or laser is not as cheap as the lack of ammunition, Russia seems to be out of luck against Katran. As for jammers, they don't have laser systems. They probably produced several Krasukha vehicles and, at the same time, they still advertise Repellent 1, which is a jamming type vehicle. So maybe it is almost the same vehicle. There is no question of active destruction of UAVs with such systems. Any system integrated with a jammer has the intention of jamming GPS radio frequencies that can only be used by the UAV. In other words, Katran is superior to any Russian defense system. On the other hand, there are other types of UAVs that can make war a nightmare for Russia, not just Katran. Ukraine has recently revealed an example of this. Ukraine has tested a drone with a range of 3,000 kilometers, enough to strike both Moscow and St. Petersburg. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the development in a speech, calling for more weapons to be produced. No additional details about the weapon were shared, but Kiev has in the past deployed long-range drones to strike Russian targets such as airports and oil refineries. This drone, with its incredible range, is among the types that Ukraine could use against Russia. While specialising in drones, the Ukrainian side is also taking defensive measures against drones that Russia could use. One of these is the thermal camouflage used by Ukrainian soldiers. Ukraine's infantry is stepping into the future with a new type of battlefield technology, that makes them virtually invisible to thermal cameras and reconnaissance drones. This is not a Kyiv fever dream or a Ukrainian miracle. It is very real and it works. For most of military history, camouflage has been about fooling the human eye. Think tiger stripes in the jungle, desert tan in the Middle East, or pixelated digital camouflage that looks cool on recruitment posters but doesn't do much in the field. But the battlefield of 2025 doesn't care what you look like to the naked eye. It cares how you look to a drone circling 2 clicks overhead with a thermal sensor tuned to detect heat signatures the size of a rabbit. Camouflage today is not about hiding. It's about erasing. This camouflage, developed by the Ukrainians, covers the complete disappearance from the enemy's sensor suite. Thermal cameras detect infrared radiation, not light, like those mounted on Russian Orlan-10 drones or Lancet loitering munitions. They don't care if your uniform matches the dirt. They care if your body is radiating when everything around you is covered in snow. This is why modern camouflage has become a science of signature management. You are no longer just hiding visually, you are hiding thermally, electronically, and spectrally. You manage every emission your body or equipment can give off. This means minimizing your heat, reducing your radar cross-section, suppressing your electromagnetic emissions, and doing all this while being mobile, agile, and combat-ready. The anti-thermal suits Ukraine is fielding are part of this new playbook. Instead of radiating body heat, this camouflage uses multi-layered materials that reflect ambient thermal energy. This way, the thermal image does not shine against a cold background. The clothing acts like a thermal mirror, reflecting what's around them and creating a false baseline that tricks thermal sensors into seeing nothing. But here's the trick. These are not bulky blankets or static nets that you take shelter under. These are lightweight, wearable garments designed for movement, built for reconnaissance patrols, assault teams and medevac units that need to be fast and quiet. Soldiers can walk, crawl, climb, and even fight while wearing these things. While Russia is investing in more drones, more sensors, and more thermals, Ukraine is investing in countermeasures that not only reduce the risk of detection, but also completely disrupt the detection pattern. Concrete evidence of this Ukrainian use of thermal camouflage is already emerging. In recent weeks, the 56th Brigade has released a video that has shaken Russian drone operators. The footage showed Ukrainian soldiers in anti-thermal camouflage moving almost invisibly across the terrain while being filmed by thermal sensors. These suits have not only been tested in the laboratory, they are already in operation. Reconnaissance units, sniper teams, assault groups, and even defense teams are deploying with thermal camouflage. This is a direct response to Russia's overwhelming reliance on drone surveillance and kamikaze FPVs, forcing a recalibration of Russian targeting doctrine. Drones are in the sky 24/7. FPVs scout targets, loitering munitions hover like vultures. And lurking in the background, Russian artillery batteries await coordinates. This is a battlefield where movement equals exposure, and exposure equals death. In this context, thermal camouflage is not a luxury, but the difference between being the hunter or the hunted. Imagine leading a reconnaissance team tasked with scouting a Russian position. In the past, your options were limited. Move under cover of darkness, avoid open terrain, and make sure the drone's battery is low. Now, with an anti-thermal suit, you can cross that area. You can get within 50 meters of the enemy and they won't see you in IR. You can report back, shoot, adjust, and maybe even turn back. This is the most critical advantage of thermal stealth. These thermal camouflages allow them to move unseen, undetected by enemy sensors, which is seen as the first step in Russia's chain of death. Let's talk about snipers. A good sniper team is already hard to find. Add thermal camouflage and they become legendary on the border. Now, Ukrainian snipers wearing thermal camouflage can settle on ridgelines, spy on roads, or cover a friendly attack, unnoticed by UAVs roaming the hills. And snipers can relocate after a shot without leaving behind a glowing thermal trail. So can evacuation teams. These men are among the most exposed personnel on the battlefield. Shooting the wounded under fire is dangerous enough without a drone broadcasting your every move to artillery crews miles away. But thermal camouflage gives medics precious seconds, sometimes minutes, to remove them undetected. This means lives saved, not just from bullets, but from being tracked and targeted during the response. Recently, open spaces have become death traps. Thermal stealth turns the terrain into an asset again. But with these suits, soldiers can once again maneuver in no man's land. Movement becomes possible, siege becomes feasible, surprise becomes realistic. In other words, thermal camouflage is not just about not dying, it is about reshaping how operations are planned and executed. It allows for new tactics, greater mobility, more aggressive action, and the ability to seize and hold the initiative. And let's not ignore the morale boost. Soldiers know they can act with a reduced risk of being instantly illuminated by a drone. Confidence changes the way units work. It encourages bolder missions. Thermal camouflage technology can provide Ukrainian soldiers with all this. As we can see, the Ukrainian army is both producing UAVs and working on tactics to evade them. For Russia, this has turned into a purely psychological warfare. Soldiers in the Russian army are well aware of how specialized the Ukrainians are in both areas. But does the Kremlin realize this? Probably not. In fact, the Putin regime is still looking for soldiers to be targets for Ukrainian drones. The Russian leader has recently made an incredible change in this regard. Russian President Vladimir Putin has dramatically increased Russia's military mobilization efforts, ordering 160,000 men to be drafted into the spring draft on April 1, 2024. The call came amid the war with Ukraine, but the Russian government has consistently insisted that the conscription campaign is not directly related to the war. Although the Kremlin insists that conscripts will not be sent to the front lines, speculation over recruitment for the front lines has raised questions about Russia's military readiness and the potential long-term consequences of increased conscription. Conscription has been a cornerstone of Russian military doctrine for centuries, with compulsory military service typically required for men between the ages of 18 and 30. Russia conducts 2 conscription campaigns a year, one in the spring and one in the fall, during which thousands of young men are drafted. The spring draft is usually the more important of the two, with conscripts serving for a period of 1 year. This spring's draft is larger than in previous years, with a recruitment quota. The increase is part of the Kremlin's proposal to renew military ranks amid a plan to increase the number of its active duty soldiers to 1.5 million by 2026. The whole reason for the urgency on this issue is casualties. Russia faces an increasingly difficult military situation in recent years. The war in Ukraine has caused heavy losses for the Russian military, which has lost more than 768,000 Russian soldiers since the beginning of the war. This number is a combination of soldiers killed, wounded, missing, and captured. Even more strikingly, the losses were particularly high in the second half of 2023, with some sources indicating that the Russian army lost more than 2,000 soldiers in a single day in November. This was the highest one-day casualty toll since the start of the war. Because of all this, the Kremlin felt compelled to do something about recruitment. The decision to recruit 160,000 people is the latest step in this regard. While the Russian government has publicly stated that the increased conscription has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, the timing of the decree is a worrying sign. Putin's call for the conscription of 160,000 men, his largest spring draft in years, comes at a time when Russia is increasingly under pressure on the battlefield. The Russian military's slow but consistent push in Ukraine has been characterized by heavy losses, and the war does not appear to be close to being won. In addition to conscription, the Russian government is also recruiting large numbers of contract soldiers, offering high salaries and large bonuses as incentives to sign up. Given the scale of Russian casualties, Putin's decision to increase conscription seems like a natural reaction to the need for reinforcements. However, the Kremlin's claim that the spring draft has nothing to do with the ongoing war has left many wondering whether the Russian government is telling the whole truth about the real motivation behind the conscription drive. The massive increase in the number of conscripts suggests that the Russian military may be preparing for a protracted war that will require a larger, more sustainable fighting force. In addition to conscripts, Russia also relies heavily on contract soldiers. volunteers who sign up to serve for long periods of time, typically with the promise of higher pay and benefits. Recruitment of contract soldiers has been particularly important for the Russian military during the war in Ukraine. Many contract soldiers were recruited to serve on the front lines in exchange for lucrative financial incentives, with some saying they received bonuses of up to several $1,000s. The fact that the Russian government has decided to offer these economic incentives is a sign of pressure on the country's military manpower. While conscription provides a guaranteed source of manpower, the recruitment of contract soldiers demonstrates the growing need for highly experienced and motivated troops. Such troops are often better trained and equipped than conscripts, and are therefore a very valuable commodity in the current war. The question, however, is whether Russia is in a financial position to embark on such an ambitious military expansion amid the ongoing costs of the war in Ukraine. While the inclusion of conscripts and contract soldiers may help in the short term, the long-term viability of such an expansion will depend on the ability of the Russian economy to support an expanded military force. In addition, the quality of recruits and the adequacy of training programs will be central to the army's readiness for future conflicts. The conscription of 160,000 men will have a terrible social and economic impact on Russia. Conscripts have never been popular, and many young men have tried to find ways to avoid compulsory military service. Cash bonuses for contract soldiers have blunted some of the popular resentment towards the conscription system, but the reality is that the draft affects a significant part of Russian society. As the war in Ukraine continues, the Russian government may face growing public pressure to end conscription or limit its scope. The number of young men who have lost their lives in the war, together with the economic cost of the war, would lead to increased resentment among the Russian population. In addition, the burdens of military service would potentially disproportionately affect poor families, who are more likely to be the focus of conscription. With the war in full swing, these social dynamics could have profound implications for the Russian government's ability to maintain domestic stability. In short, looking at the overall situation, we can see that the Ukrainians are increasing their UAV production, development of maritime drones, and their ability to evade such weapons. Russia, on the other hand, is clearly focused on finding troops to send to the front lines of the war against the military capabilities of the Ukrainian army. These two different attitudes are actually determining the course of the war. So, it seems likely that the more Ukraine produces new drones, the more Russian soldiers will be cut off. It is not possible for the Kremlin regime to understand this problem at the moment. Putin is more focused on the 4 regions of Ukraine and Crimea than on the 800,000 casualties. But when the Russian leader is confronted with the harsh reality of war, it may be too late. In this scenario, the Ukrainian side, with its drone army, could liberate both the 4 regions and Crimea from occupation. This could be accomplished through a massive Ukrainian drone operation. At that time, we could see Ukrainian drones flying in Russia's airspace or Sea Baby-like maritime drones in Crimean ports. Thank you for watching.